And we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Deceive reality podcast. And we are here today with the escape artist, Thomas Solomon. Thomas, how are you doing today?
Good. How's everybody? Good evening.
Good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
And I guess we'll start where we always start with people is how did you get into magic or escapes for you? What sort of was that journey, especially going into the escapes and the magic and everything together?
Well, it's a loaded question because it's nothing with me is easy. Nothing with me has ever been one sentence. Everything is crazy. But I can tell the very short version of it. What happened? My parents, in everyone's life, your parents have a certain amount of influence on you. And my father was a mechanical engineer and used to love taking apart things, and my mother was a nurse, but she had a lot of artistic proclivities. She was very good at design and writing and painting. So I like to think that genetically maybe I have a couple of those things. But in my life, for the people that really made me the person that I am and kind of led to where I am today, were not so much my parents. I mean, your parents have different influences on you, but there were really two people in my life. And I'll just talk very briefly about those two people. I'll try and make it very quick because they are, kind of complicated stories. Mm-hmm. The first one was a guy by the name of JB. And JB was this middle-aged guy in his 40s when I was 11 years old, right? And he was a locksmith. He worked at a locksmith. Now, when I was young, like my father, I used to like taking apart things, right? I remember my father one night brought home some telephones from work, old telephones. And I had taken them apart and I was looking at them, and it was very fascinating to me. And, about how you see the bells inside of an old-fashioned telephone, and then the circuit that comes away from the bell, or the clanger, I should say. And when the circuit is connected with a call, the bells ring, right? So I thought this was so fascinating when I was a kid. And so I was kind of doing that. It wasn't so much magic. I just liked mechanical things. And I liked locks and a fascination with locks. And at the time, I was 11 years old, and my father said, well, if you like this stuff, maybe I can get you a job working in a locksmith shop. So I was only 11 years old. I couldn't legally work. So he made some calls and he got me a job. He had some friends. He got me, kind of a quote unquote job at a locksmith shop where I would work in the summer and I would work after school. And because I was 11 years old, I couldn't actually, I wasn't really supposed to work. I mean, it was illegal. But he kind of worked a deal with them, and they said, well, okay, but he can't deal with customers. He can't go on lockout calls. If he wants to be in the shop and sweep the floors and, learn about the tools, that's fine. So that's what I did. And there were 3 locksmiths in the shop. There was this guy, Jose, who, again, is middle-aged, and he was the automobile expert. Whenever there was a problem, somebody locked their keys in their car, or they needed to cut a new key for the ignition or whatever. He knew everything about cars. So any call that came in that had to do with an automobile, this guy, Jose, would go out on that call, right? He was the expert. And then there was another guy, Dennis, who kind of did all the residential work, the mortise locks, the locks on your house, all of this, right? And then lastly, there was this guy, JB, and he was the safe expert. He did everything with safes. So, the police would call and they had busted a house where they were drug trafficking and there was a safe there, right? And they needed the safe opened. And he did all of these things. He could manipulate the safes. He knew how to drill through them. He knew how to punch the dial. He even knew how to use thermite, which I thought was, as a kid, just incredible. Thermite's a type of explosive. And so I'm working in the shop. My father gets me this job there, and I'm in the shop. And for some odd reason, this guy, this middle-aged guy, I mean, I was only 11 years old, this guy, JB, kind of took a liking to me, right? And he was this chain smoker, and, you know, every other word was a curse word. So at 11 years old, I'm learning all these curse words, you know, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I come from my parents are so conservative. I live in the suburbs. Now I'm downtown in the city. You know, I'm hanging with this guy who's smoking all the time. He's talking about the time he did acid. And I'm like, oh my God, right? I'm like, this is crazy. But he took a liking to me, and he would show me how to use the power tools and the hand tools. And, you know, he told me all these great stories. And he said one thing to me one time that I still remember to this day. And he said, you know, he knew all the tricks of locksmithing, right? You know, the shortcuts, you know, he knew these techniques that really, you know, few people knew about how to get into a safe. And he always said to me, I don't like to train other guys because I don't want to give away this knowledge that I've discovered from years and years of doing this on my own. And I just don't want to hand it to some other guy. You know, everybody has to find their process. But for some reason, it's probably because he didn't think I was a threat because I was only 11 years old. He was showing me all this stuff, right? And after a while, I started to go on lockouts with him. I wasn't supposed to, you know, and he was kind of like, come with me. You know, he drove this van. There was no heat in the van. So in the winters of Wisconsin, he would drive with all the windows rolled down because he's smoking cigarettes, you know, and, you know, he's got to blow the smoke out the window. So I'm this little kid, you know, in the passenger seat thinking, wow, this is nuts, you know? And so he started taking me on calls, and I was on so many lockouts with safes and saw him drilling safes and using thermite and punching the dial and all these crazy things, right? And so, you know, I kind of learned stuff like that from him. And then when I was in the shop, he would show me how to pick locks. Oh, you do this. Hey, you can make a tool with this. If you take a file folder and you take the strip of metal out of the file folder, that was a thing he showed me, you can make a lockpick from it. So he's showing me all these things. He showed me how to use the power tools, the hand tools. And he was a funny guy. I mean, he was, you know, he had a lot of interesting stories. When he was a kid, when he was a young man, he had seen the Beatles live in concert. I mean, I didn't know anybody who ever saw the Beatles live, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, that was just like, there was something so magical about this guy. And, you know, when you're 11 years old, you're thinking, you know, it's like a new world. I'm hearing these stories about girls and drugs, and I'm like, wow, this is nuts. So that's that story. So I learned all this stuff about locks from him, right? There's one other person. The other person was this kid named Joe. And Joe was only about 14 years old, right? I was 11, so I was about 3 years older than me. And he, you know, when you're 11 years old, the kid who's 14 is kind of like worldly to you, you know? I mean, so I grew up in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, in a very suburban area, very conservative. You know, all the houses there were built in the 60s. And, you know, there was just a certain mindset, right, about people. But there were a couple houses in this suburb that had been there for 100 years, you know, before the subdivision was formed. And this guy, this kid, Joe, who was one of, I think, 7 children, they lived in one of these old 100-year-old houses. It was this big Victorian house, and you know, you'd go up and you'd ring the doorbell, and it was like a large gong, you know. And so I kind of befriended him. I used to see him around the neighborhood, and he was always telling me about the books he read, and he read Dostoevsky, and he was reading all these. And I'm like, what? You know, this guy's reading classics. So I go over to his house one time, and it's funny, right? They have this. His parents were very kind of bohemian people, artists. I don't know what they did for a living, but obviously I think they had 7 children, so they were doing something. And they had all the antiques around the house. You know, it was like so interesting to be in the house. Stuffed, taxidermy. I think the father did taxidermy, and there were like, an owl stuffed on the bookcase. It was crazy. And I remember they had this winding staircase in the house. And I go over there, and Joe had a bedroom on the second floor. And above the stairs was this big oil painting. And, it was of a man, right? And I remember walking up the stairs, and Joe says to me, "You see that oil painting up there up on the wall?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "No matter where you stand on the landing here, the painting will look at you." Right? And I thought that was the first time I ever experienced that, and sure enough, I'd go in the corner of the stairwell, I'd be on the ground, I'd be midway on the stairs, and the painting always looked at you. So, these things they're kind of passé now when you hear them, but when you're a kid, this is like being in Willy Wonka, or you're being, you're being exposed, at least I was, to a whole, like a whole different artistic world, and he did a lot of reading, and they had these big Dutch elm trees in their yard. He taught me how to climb trees and the different peaks on trees. And he was very fascinated with rocks. He taught me all about like the types of, metamorphic rocks, sedimentary rocks and stuff. And Wisconsin is very Native American. And so he used to collect arrowheads, and he had this big collection of flint arrowheads and really crazy stuff. And we used to go out, and he taught me about fossils. And I remember we broke open a rock one time, and there were trilobites inside the rock, fossils. And I learned all about that. Anyways, he had all these interests, right? But one day I was at his house, and he had a deck of cards. And he was doing all these fancy shuffles. He's riffle shuffling the deck and bridging it. And he does a ribbon spread and one hand cuts. And I was just amazed. I thought, wow, that's incredible, right? I mean, he didn't do any magic, but he used all these shuffles. And I remember I asked him, I said, can you teach me? And he said, "Oh, your hands are too small. Yeah, I mean, when you get older, and I kept asking him, and he said, "Well, look, go to the library and get a magic book, get a book on cards, playing cards. And, you can start small and whatever." So that's how I got into magic, basically from this kid, Joe, because he exposed me to the books in the library. And the locksmithing came actually from this guy, JB, who I ended up in the shop and, started to learn all these things.
So from being really kind of inquisitive then as a child, when did it become, obviously like with the cards and the locksmith, it was almost like a job / hobby, but when did you realize it could actually be an international career?
Well, I mean, magic, when I discovered those books in the library, I just became enamored with magic. I mean, I just got so excited about it. I mean, first time reading about cards, and I think it was Bruce Elliott's book, The Great Secrets of Magic. And then I'm reading about cards, and all of a sudden I'm reading about billiard balls and coins and cups and balls and all these things. So it just kind of snowballed. And I thought, oh, this is like, incredible. I'm learning all these different things. And so then the cards actually led to other aspects of magic. And I started to do that. And I put shows together, and I would show my parents. And, and the thing I liked about magic too was there's a mechanical element to it. I mean, when I was a kid, I would buy all the apparatus magic. So you get the tubes and the stratosphere and all these different things. Oh, and, the methods are often very clever. Mm-hmm. They're simple, there's genius in simplicity, but, it's a lot of times I would think, oh my gosh, I would have never thought that, And so I became enamored of magic. I still worked in locksmithing until I was about 15. But I just, I had got so excited about magic, and I'm telling my parents, I want to do this. I want to, you know, and of course they're like, well, that's fine, but you know, you got to stay in school. And, you know, so there was a confluence of these people that instilled these interests in me. You know, my friend with the rocks and the arrowheads and the how to climb trees and you know, the art paint, the oil painting on the wall, and then magic, you know, and as you guys know, because you're performers, it all comes together, you know. I mean, the great magicians were artists, really.
Yeah, artists and scientists, yeah, totally.
And
when was it that you decided to move to New York, or how did that all take place?
Well, before that, when I was in the 7th grade, I had never heard of Houdini. And when I was in the 7th grade, I had a friend, he had a book, and the book had a paperback book and had an illustration on the cover of this naked man in chains. I just remember that. And I looked at it, and I thought it said the great holdout. And I thought, a holdout? Well, I know what a holdout is. It's because I knew about cards. So I thought,
sure.
Okay, the great holdout, right? And then I asked my friend who had the book, and he said, no. There was this guy. He used to perform in the circus, and they would, you know, lock him up in things, and he'd escape. And, you know, and I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. You know, I don't know anything about it. I don't even know who that is. So then I read a book, and you know, and obviously then you think, wow, you know, it's kind of interesting, you know, and that in some way also kind of, you know, helps to cement the interest, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and once I read that, I thought, wow, and this guy made a living doing this, you know, and then I come to find out, you know, later on, years later, oh, well, in vaudeville in 1900, he was making $2,000 a week. That's incredible. You know, in 1900, you could have a whole steak dinner for about 35 cents. So he's making $1,500, $2,000 a week. I mean, it's incredible, you know? So, but in answer to your question, I worked many years as a magician. I started doing escapes really just by accident. And then I just had agents and so many people say, well, the magic's great, but the escapes are wonderful. I love it. You know, so I was getting the better feedback on the escapes. And I think too, it was just because it was different. Mm-hmm. You know, magicians are a dime a dozen, you know, and unfortunately, a lot of us are doing the same, you know, 10 or 15 card effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And escapes, you know, it's unique, it's different, you know, and I think that, you know, I think that's kind of what steered me in that way, because I was interested in making money, right? I never wanted to be an artist who starved.
Yeah.
You know, I had friends, you know, I wanted to have a car when I was 16 years old. I mean, I had, you know, all my friends had cars, and, you know, and I wanted to buy cool clothes, and I had these aspirations. I wanted to do art, but I also wanted to make money, you know?
Sure.
And yeah, and I did that for many years. I worked in Chicago for years and years in the nightclub circuit, and then I decided to come to New York. And one day I was 21 years old, and I just told my parents I'm leaving on a bus, and they freaked out.
That's their word. Well, what you're talking about actually is very similar to a question we had in from Chris, who says, to make it a career as an escape artist, you recommend people also perform some magic to get more corporate gigs, or I guess just gigs in general?
Right. Well, that's a great question, because I years ago, about 20 years ago, I did a lecture on escapes, and I've been asked again to do it. I don't really want to do it anymore, because now I kind of have the mentality of, remember my friend JB, who said, I don't want to show just to everybody what I've discovered. You know, maybe one day when I'm old and I can't perform anymore, I'll write a book. Yeah, right? I get requests. I shouldn't say all, but I get a fair amount of requests. Write a book, lecture. I saw your lecture 20 years ago. Can you come back and and do it? Anyways, to that person's question, yes. And one of the things I said in the lecture, and I firmly believe this, you cannot be a great or even a good escape artist unless you're a good magician. Got to be a good magician, because really escapes are a form of magic. You have to learn how to sell it. I mean, and that was the brilliance of Houdini. You know, Houdini used to say, well, it's not what I do, it's what everybody thinks I do. So, you know, there's whole books written about stories and things he supposedly did, but probably never happened.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is that, look at this, 100 years later, we still talk about it. You know, magicians talk about it. Laymen still tell me, oh, you know, the time he was under the ice. Please. Please. You know?
They get confused. We were only talking about this recently, myself and Dave, about the Tony Curtis movie, that people think Houdini died on stage because Tony Curtis' character died on stage. You know, so that confusion is mixed up with the kind of the fantasy of the movie and the whole kind of mystery around his whole life. Anyway.
Right. I mean, I'm always reminded of when I was young. I knew Milburn Christopher, and I don't know if you know who that is, but I had come to New York. I also knew Randy pretty well, but I had come to New York and met with Milburn Christopher, and Milburn Christopher knew Jim Collins, and you know, and he had told me one time. He said, Milburn Christopher said that somebody once asked Beatrice Houdini, right, and about secrets, right? Houdini's secrets were buried with him. And she said, that's nonsense. All magicians know his secrets, right? She said the real secret was Houdini himself. So that's really the kind of puzzle, right? It's not, you know, it's selling this. It's selling it. That's what it is. And to that person's thing, I would say yes. Learn to be a great magician. Learn the techniques of misdirection and all these things, and then you will be a great escape artist.
Yeah, we were talking about that as well with Jonathan Goodwin about the theatrics of an escape. That it has to really be, it's the ebb and flow to get people invested. It's so important.
Absolutely, because you know, escapes, when you think about it, they violate the basic premise of theater, right? The basic premise of theater is that the audience does not know what is going to happen before it happens. So you go see Hamilton, you go see, you know, you go over here to Broadway and you see a show. I mean, you may kind of know because other people have told you, or Cliff Notes or whatever, the theme of the story, let's say, right? But you're still going to be surprised. You're still going to be surprised by, okay, well, you know, it's told in this way, or this happens, and the problem with escapes is that when an audience hears about an escape artist, they instinctively know what is going to happen. They know you're going to be locked in something and you're going to get out. So now you've just destroyed the whole element of surprise, right? I mean, at least magic has a surprise. Like if I have a layman pick a card and they sign it and the card disappears, well, they don't really know the outcome. Not yet. They don't know, is it going to come out of a lemon? Is it going to be in my pocket? Is it going to be in his wallet? Is it going to be, you know, under the glass on the bar? Is he going to tear it up and restore it? So you have all these elements where you can still control the action, so to speak. But escapes, there's a little bit less of that, right? I mean, if a layman goes and they see a guy in a straitjacket, or he introduces a straitjacket on stage, they already know in their head what's going to happen. He's going to be put in it, and he's going to escape. So now you can mitigate that, you can change that, but that's where the work comes in, right? That's where selling it comes in. You know, now do you sell this as a historical event? You know, do you talk about straitjackets? Do you sell it as a Houdini thing? Well, this is what Houdini did in 1900. You know, do you do it as a comedy effect? Do you, whatever. You institute some element of surprise so that the audience can go, oh, that was cool. They leave the theater and they're still talking about it. So.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's such a so true. And it's similar to, I think, what people talk about mentalism, where you have someone think of something, you tell them what it is. You have someone think of something, you tell them. People know the outcome before kids. It's similar sort of stuff, and trying to get the theatrics of everything to go. Do you find when you're putting on a show to try and get the flow of where to place escapes throughout a longer show? What's your sort of decision-making process about that? If you were going to do like a big show for people, would you do one escape at the end, or would you kind of mix some smaller ones in between?
Well, I mean, you don't, in my opinion, right? I don't want to do an entire show of handcuff escapes.
Yeah.
You know, while they interest me, they're not going to interest the audience, right? I mean, I think that, you know, a magician who does an entire show of cards, it's the same thing. I mean, there's, you know, the vast majority of laymen do not like card tricks. They've done polls on this before. You know, most people, they'll watch 2 card tricks and that's it. They don't, it's only magicians that want to see 100 of them. But you can still make it work. For example, you look at Ricky Jay, right? So Ricky Jay basically did a whole show on cards. I mean, that's his shtick. That's his thing. But he had ways of changing it around. You know, at one point he's throwing cards. He throws it through the watermelon. You know, then he talks a little bit about the history of cards and Hofzinser, and, you know, and he does different things with the cards. So it's not impossible. I mean, you can do it, but it takes work, right? It's not, you're not just going to go, excuse me, you know, read a book and go tomorrow and do it. You know, it's like, you know, creating an album or writing songs. I mean, it takes time. You're going to struggle through it. But in my thing, I did the Salute to Magic several years ago for the Society of American Magicians. And I did a 2-hour show. And the first part of the show was all magic. There were some escape-related things, not really escapes, but escape metaphors put in my scripts, which would lead people a certain way. And then the second act was all escapes. So, you know, I've done shows where I've done 1 escape, and the rest was magic. And that's usually my concluding thing. And then I've done shows where I've done 7 or 8 escapes. But there's always a build. See, there's a build. There has to be a build. So when I did the Salute to Magic in Act 2, you know, they had some police officers there from the NYPD, and I would do some things on stage. And I have the cabinet obscuro where, you know, you can see what I'm doing, but you can't see what I'm doing, which I've used for years. And then that, you know, and the escapes built, right? And I did an escape from here. The MTA runs the New York City subway. And years ago, I did a challenge with them with one of their money bags. They don't use coins anymore. Now everything's electronic. You have the pass card that lets you into the subway system. But they used to have tokens. And the tokens you would buy, you know, with currency. And so I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Money Train with Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson. Yeah. But it's about those guys. They were called revenue collectors. And they would go into the subway, the various subway stations around New York, you know, every couple days, and they would collect the bags of money, the currency. I mean, none of that is done anymore because it's all electronic now. Digital, but I have one of those bags. I have one of those currency bags. Huge. I mean, they're big enough for a man to get into. And I didn't escape from that, and it was kind of a long story, but I got to keep the bag. And I did that at the Salute to Magic. So I did the handcuffs, I did the bag, and then I did a water tank escape at the end. So there was a build. You know, you start small, you do a couple things, build until you're, you know, until you reach the pinnacle, so to speak.
Sounds great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you as well about you've done a lot of
for Channel 4 20 years ago, and I mean, I don't know if I necessarily have any recommendations. I mean, I was approached to do the show, and they wanted me to to write the show. And in the case of the one on Channel 4, I worked with Andy Nyman, the great mentalist, David Britland. We all worked together, and we came up with this really great show. I mean, we had some really wild stuff we did that, we had to get some major permission to do. It was crazy, but it was fun. It was fun. And I mean, recommendation, I don't know. I mean, I think that, again, I was approached to do it. I do think that, in television, one thing you have to understand is that there's no risk in television, right? I learned that because for many years, I'm doing these underwater escapes in the river. I mean, I've done so many of them, jumping off bridges and doing all these crazy things. But when you start doing work in television, they have risk management people. They have whole departments that say, okay, what are you going to do? Okay, well, how are you going to do it? You've got to tip all your methods. They got to know, because there is no chance that that anybody's going to get hurt, because it's all liability, man. I mean, a television company will never, ever do that. So, I learned that, first off. I mean, I did a safe escape underwater. I did all these things, but I had to reveal a lot of my methods to them. Which I'm really happy about. Yeah.
That was my question before Dave had his question. Was that I only watched the show there recently. Again, it was on the Channel 4 player, and I will put up a link if anyone wants to see it. But it was nice the way that you did that, kind of, you tipped some methods and things so it was more educational instead of it just being the magician knows the tricks kind of a thing. It was nice to kind of, I'm an escape artist myself, so it was nice to show some little methods and things within it.
Yeah, you have to do that because that's part of the sell, you see, right? I mean, again, magic has a problem. Laymen often have a problem with magic because magicians and escape artists play it the wrong way. You do not want to play it that I know something and you don't, right?
Definitely.
Because that will not work in today's world. And actually, most of the laymen that you work for, they're, in some ways they're probably smarter than you. You're working for doctors and engineers and people who, these are smart people, so they don't want to be belittled. Nobody wants that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't like magic that makes people look stupid. Escapes that make people look stupid. I never. I have a few routines where just to make the determination that what I'm using is real and it's not a magic prop, that I may lock them on somebody. But you got to be careful, right? And I show the utmost respect to these people, because remember, you're putting them in a compromising situation. They can easily mess you up. And I don't mean mess you up in terms of messing up your the actual routine, but I mean, leaving with a very sour taste in their mouth about not only you, but the art of magic, which is not what you want to happen. You want people to leave going, wow, that was cool. I liked it. The guy didn't make a fool of me. He was respectful, because nobody wants that. So it's, I see routines even to this day, and I see performers and I see them do stuff and I go, what? Oh, but it was a stooge. We set it up. Okay, but you're missing the point. It's the message. What message are you sending? I saw something on television just the other day, a magician, and I was appalled. I couldn't believe it. I was calling other magicians on the phone. We were talking. I said, did you see that? He goes, yeah. And, and I said, you know what? I'll bet you the spectator was a stooge. I bet you they preset it. They probably told the guy, listen, the magician's going to hand you a bottle of water, ask you to you hold it above your head and turn it over, and the water's going to come down on your face. And the guy probably said, oh, okay, all right, I'll deal with it. So I'm not so much worried about that guy who was probably set up. The larger issue is the message.
Yeah.
Right? What message are you sending? So for all the people who are sitting at home who've never seen a magician before, and they don't know that's preset, they don't know there's a stooge, they're watching it on TV, and they see that and they go, aha, see, honey, you see this? That's why I don't like magic. Or they go to shows and you try and get them out of the audience and they don't. Nope. Because it's the subtext. It's I know. I don't know for sure, but I'm sure it was set up, right? Yeah. I don't believe they would just bring a guy out and do that. But again, they missed the point of the larger message, right? They tried to get a laugh, or they did get a laugh, and they set it up with this person, but completely wrong. Wrong, because, look, there's an old adage, right? Good news travels fast, bad news travels faster. And that's what you don't want here. That message for everybody who sees that on television is going to stick right up here. And they'll remember, oh, yeah, so that's what magicians do, right? They get you out of the audience.
It's too. We've talked about this before as well with some other magicians, even Michael Amaro. I think we were talking to him about it, and we were saying that if you have a bad magician, on their behalf, they say, "Oh, he's a bad magician." Well, then every magician is a bad magician from there on out. They don't. If there was a bad band, they'd be like, "Oh, it was a night," or they want to reckon the event. But if it's a bad magician, it's a bad magician. It's bad magic. It's right across the board.
Absolutely correct. People do not differentiate, right, between artists. You can go and see a bad stand-up comic and you can go, all right, well, maybe at an off night or whatever, or but that won't stop me from trying again, going to a club next week and seeing somebody else.
Definitely.
Whether that happens in magic, I don't know, but I would, be inclined to believe that it probably does, because again, a bad comic doesn't make a fool out of you, right? A bad comic's just a bad comic. You're sitting in the audience and, he's telling some jokes and, whatever, you don't find him funny, or he's too, he swears too much, or the jokes are too political and you don't like. Okay, you leave there and, you don't really feel, I think violated is the wrong word, but, you don't feel as if somebody attacked you. You see a magician and they make a fool out of you, and the audience ha 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 laughs, and you're the guy they brought out of the audience. Oh, that will remain not only with that person, but probably everybody who saw that for a long time.
I think it comes down to exposure as well. That people have heard jokes their entire life, so they know they like some jokes, and people have heard music, so they know they like some music, even if they didn't like that little band. But this might be the only time they've seen magic, so they just go, oh, I don't like magic. I've even seen recently enough, like in the last few years, magicians do the kiss on the cheek, turn and kiss the girl thing, or like the bra, the handkerchief down the top, pulling out the bra, and it's just like, what are you doing? Nobody's gonna, it's completely unacceptable sort of gags, as they say. It's not.
Yeah, you shouldn't, the goal shouldn't be to get a laugh at any expense.
Yeah.
I never really understood that. I never understand magicians that think, well, if the audience is laughing and it's great, it's entertainment. No, your job as a magician and an escape artist is, yes, it's to entertain the audience, but primary to that is, if you're a magician, you got to fool the audience, not with puzzles, with magic. They have to leave there and go, how the hell, man? The guy told me to think of a number and he turned the paper around and it's got the number on it. Or, that guy had those handcuffs. He let me look at him and I put him on behind his back, and, even if he had a key, how's he going to get a key into the lock behind his back? So your primary job as a magician and an escape artist is to fool the audience, not with a puzzle, because puzzles can fool people too, but there's no emotional connection to it. The magic has to be strong. And so, I constantly look at stuff and think, no, it's a puzzle. I don't want a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
You want magic. So, magic and escape artistry is an art. So like oil painting, the oil painting that looked at you from every part of the room, and, great music and literature, throughout the world. These things take time and they take work. And, you read about, whomever, James Joyce, let's say, right?
Yeah.
And I was reading an article about, when he wrote Dubliners, and the struggles he had to write that. So, it's not easy. You have to love it. That's what I'm saying. You have to love it.
Yeah, it has to be passionate in it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's very true. And we have some other audience questions that we got. And I think this one's kind of apt right now. Chris says, to me, that's the one. This was the one. Yes. Ian, what do you think of magicians doing escapes as publicity stunt when they don't regularly perform escapes?
I'm probably going to make enemies here, but yeah, I don't always think it's a good idea. I mean, the thing about publicity stunts, and I've done many of them. I've been in Boston Harbor and the Potomac, and you name a river in America. I don't want to say guarantee, but I probably didn't escape in it. The Mississippi, the East River, the Hudson River. And the thing about publicity, the thing about those type of escapes are, number one, nobody's paying you to see you do that, right? You're doing it to drum up publicity. And the second thing is that, it's not an indication of how talented or good you are when you do these escapes, when you get huge crowds of people, right? A guy who hangs upside down in a straitjacket in the middle of the city, and I've done this many times before for publicity events, you're going to have a crowd. You're going to have hundreds of people that are going to watch. Just as people follow fire engines to accidents, right? You live on a street and the house down the block is on fire. Imagine all the neighbors come out and watch it. It's a little morbid, but it's human nature. People always say, well, I don't want to see anybody die. I don't want to see anything tragic happen to anybody, but if it's going to happen, I want to be there, right? So the publicity thing, I'm always kind of, stick with what you do, right? Because you can be a mentalist and do a publicity event that promotes you as a mentalist. You can do a blindfold drive. You can do a newspaper prediction. Every facet of magic has their own, publicity events. I think that when a magician who's not an escape artist does an upside down straitjacket escape, let's say, they water down the escape, right? Because I'm a firm believer that it's theater, right? You have to make these things look hard, difficult, extremely difficult, because that's when you will invite the admiration for what you do, right? So you don't want to come out and say, I'm going to break Houdini's record and escape from a straitjacket. First of all, there are no records, right? But you want to struggle to get out of that straitjacket, right? Because you're selling a concept, you're selling an impossibility, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, this stuff is easy. Relatively easy. That the straitjackets, you can get gimmick straitjackets, you can do all that, and that's all fine and good. But you can't convey that to the audience. And I think that when a magician who never does escapes, but he wants some free publicity, and he goes out and he does escapes, he does the art of escape a disservice, right? Because it basically says to the audience, well, I know this guy, he doesn't really do escapes. So, he's doing a straitjacket escape. Okay, that straitjacket really doesn't look like anything I've ever seen in historical photographs, right? So again, it's all theater. I mean, I remember having these discussions with Randy years and years ago, and you have to make the stuff look hard. And Houdini learned that lesson too. I mean, Houdini, when he did the straitjacket escape, he first did it behind a curtain. And he tried to build up the response. And it was his brother who said, well, people, it might be more exciting if people see the gyrations and you're struggling to get out, which is true. But that was also 1890. So the world has changed a lot since 1890. Yes, it was exciting at the time. I mean, people probably never even saw anybody hang upside down that high in the air in 1890. So, you had a couple things going on there, but I think you have to be careful, because you should never water down your magic. You should never I don't do mentalism things. Like if I need publicity, I would never do a mentalism thing, because that's not what I sell myself as doing. I love all kinds of magic. I've bought mentalism stuff. I have many books here on mentalism, but I don't know. I want to be aware of how it's done, because maybe I can use that application somewhere else.
Sure.
Yeah. But I think you have to be careful. You don't need to do everything in life. You just need to do maybe one or two things really well.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, Salvador Dali painted a certain way. He didn't paint the way Picasso did. He didn't paint the way Mondrian did. They had their style. They had their, Matisse did certain type of painting. So, you find what you love, you stick with it, and you don't need to do everything. You need publicity for your magic show. Well, there's publicity things you can do. You could take, I don't know, you could do a Bill and Lemon and build it up to where, I don't know, you do something, you incorporate a bank, right? You go to a bank, you get a special, dollar bill or, $100 bill or a collector's thing, and it appears in a lemon. There's so many things you can do, remember when David Copperfield took the baseball card that was worth like, $10 million, and he tore it up and then restored it? Well, that's an example of lateral thinking, right? Looking at, okay, these are the things I do. Now I need some publicity. I'm doing a piece on television. What out of my repertoire can I take, tweak, and make it work for, television or something? So, yeah. Sorry for all the long-winded answers, but
that's great for anyone listening.
Yeah, and just I'll get through the last audience question there. What I have is, if you had a choice, would you choose rope, chain, or handcuffs to escape from?
Well, me personally, because of my experience with locks, I can always find a way to manipulate handcuffs. I mean, I've been in situations where, I used to do a show in Chicago for years and years and years and years. And I had written about this in an interview with the Magic Circular. And, where I don't like challenge things, right? But the people who ran the club, they said, oh, we got this great marketing idea. We're going to say that you can get out of anything. And we're going to have, the people come to the club and they'll get free drinks. And if they can restrain the escape artist. And at the time I thought, I don't know, because that just invites a lot of sadism. There's a lot of crazy people in the world, man.
Super glue down the barrels and stuff.
I had somebody one time that wanted to safety pin my fingers together, right? And then wanted to take a needle nose pliers and close the head of the pin so they couldn't be opened. And I said, you're kidding me, right? No. And so, I mean, you get a lot of very strange things. And I was young and I agreed to do that show. And I had people that worked with me, and I had road cases full of tools. and a key machine and files and a bench grinder and all these things. And half the time we were in the dressing room, you know, filing down tools that I could use to escape these things. But it's nerve-wracking because you're constantly thinking about, you know, the craziness that can happen. I mean, nobody can escape from anything, right? That's a marketing ploy. But you create the illusion that you can do, but it can be, man, it can be nerve-wracking because every night you're thinking, what on earth, you know, is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because, you know, I had one guy, had some doctors come one time, they wanted to take tourniquet tubing and wrap. That one I actually did. But, you know, this heavy tourniquet tubing and tie your hands with it. And because it's rubber, it doesn't slip. It only expands so much. But you pull out that expansion when you're tying them. So there's no slack.
No slack,
So,
yeah.
you know, you can escape it. You can, but you're going to have some nasty bruises on your hands. So, you know, it's like, I don't know. Do I want this life for me? You know?
We just stick to the card tricks. Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know,
On your channel 4, you had a piece, and it was a really cool piece where the camera panned around you 360, kind of Matrix style, and you talked about all the different injuries you had.
Yeah.
Out of all those injuries, what's the worst injury you think you have?
Well, I did an escape years ago in the Hudson River where I was handcuffed to a chair, and they picked up the chair with me handcuffed to it, and they threw the whole thing in the drink. And that I ruptured an eardrum.
Oh,
Nasty.
Yeah, which is painful. I mean, I often hear this now, you know, with you know, I have a lot of friends who are in the military and stuff, and I often hear about, you know, their concussion injuries and they get ruptured eardrums from, you know, IEDs, right? But I know what that's like. A ruptured eardrum, I mean, hurts. It's bad. It hurts. It's painful.
Yeah. Anybody who's had an ear infection can tell that any pain in the ear is just debilitating.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of injuries, I think it's a good time to bring up this, which is the good, the bad, and the ugly. Where basically we ask you to tell a story of a time where something went disastrously wrong, went bad, maybe even ugly, depending on how bad it went. Do you have any story that jumps into mind?
Yeah, I mean, I you know, I got three things: one that's good, one that's bad, one that's ugly, right? That I kind of thought a little bit about. The good, I would say, is the time I performed at the White House. I performed twice at the White House for President Ronald Reagan and President George Bush. And I did magic and I did escapes. And I escaped the handcuffs of the uniformed Secret Service.
Nice.
And it's an incredible story. I mean, it was so bizarre, the security and the things I had to go through. And I tell the story at length because I used to write a column for the Magic Circular. And in one of my columns, I write about it. And I mean, you had Secret Service that were in the trees and they were disguised as other people. It was nuts. It was real. I mean, talk about magic, right? Talk about magic. And deception. Oh, there was, you know, how they infiltrate the crowd. And, you know, I mean, basically they shadow you, they watch you. Because I was very close to the president. I was within, you know, shaking hands of him. And so I tell that story in the Magic Circular. So if people are interested in that, you can go to my website. You can go to the fan page, and all the articles I've ever written are there. That would be the good, because that was such a great experience. You know, performing for their families. It changed my parents' perception of magic and escape artistry. When they saw me to the White House, I mean, you know, my father never stopped talking about it.
Nice.
So I would say that's the good. The bad, I don't know if it's really bad. I don't really look at any experience as bad. I mean, if you learn from the experience, then it's a good experience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of want to live, you want to get to the end of your life and have a lot of great stories, bad ones and good ones. You know, you can always play it safe and cross the street at the corner, but sometimes you want to cross the street in the middle of the street, right? You risk getting hit by a car, but sometimes life is just more interesting, right? That way, right? And so the bad, I mean, again, what I would say is I went to the Soviet Union back in 1987, and it was communist then. And I was there for 6 months, and I toured numerous cities. I was in Leningrad, Moscow, Samarkand, Bukhara, and Tashkent. Tashkent is far in Central Asia, still on the continent of Russia, but far in Central Asia, and you're about 100 miles from Afghanistan at that point. Mm-hmm. So I toured, and I did magic there, and I had a translator, and lots of crazy stories. We were followed. I had my passport taken away, different things. I did a lot of performances, mostly for school children. And my translator went to a police station in Leningrad and got me permission to go there and do handcuff escapes for, the secret police or KGB or whatever it was. And that was brutal. I mean, it was brutal. They wouldn't let me out of the room, because I was going to try, I was handcuffed and all these things, and, let me step out of the room and do an escape. No, you got to do it here. No, you got to do it here. I said, well, I can't show you my methods, And they took a blanket and they put a blanket over my head. I mean, over my head, and came down over my hands. And I was able to do it. And I was actually able to get the handcuffs out of the country. And I have them now in my house, which
you're going to get a knock on the door after. If they see this, you're going to get a knock on the door. Tell us.
It was crazy. I mean, it was really one of the greatest experiences of my life, because you really do not understand how fortunate you are until you've been to a communist country, right? And there's no advertising, there's no free enterprise, there's nobody trying to get you into their restaurant to, eat dinner. Nobody really cares if you go to eat dinner, right? Yeah. It's a different world, a really different world. And, when I finally left the Soviet Union and I flew to Helsinki, Finland, which was the free world, it was just, it's like a huge weight being lifted off your chest. You get off the plane in Helsinki, and, it's the free world. You got shopping malls, you got pizza, you got this, you got that, so I would say that was kind of the bad, because I did a lot of things there that to this day, as I'm older now, I think, if I were going to go back, knowing how the world can be, there were things I did there that they could have easily probably detained me.
Yeah.
I had to give up my passport. I had to give up my passport when I got there. And I was traveling with a couple other people. I had a couple of assistants that worked with me, and there was a translator. And we were so friggin' nervous, because we had to surrender our passports. And they said, well, we will keep them for safekeeping. We'll keep them safe. And you're kind of like, what? I'm in a communist country. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know what we would have done. I guess you go to the American embassy or something. But, we didn't even have our passports with us. We had to trust that they would give them back to us. And they did, but it was just that, you have that kind of apprehension the entire time you're there. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm not in possession of my passport.
Yeah.
And the ugly, I would say, is I did a show. I did a show for the History Channel, and I had to recreate these different escapes. And I was recreating an escape of a couple of bank robbers from a jail. They had tunneled out of a jail, and they have this whole big story about they tunneled out of the jail. They were tunneling under the prison to escape, and as they were digging, they had accidentally broken into a sewer line. So the sewer line flooded the tunnel they were in with water and rats and other things, right? So the History Channel said, wow, that's a great story. We want to recreate that. Okay. So, we did the tunnel thing. They flooded the tunnel while I was in it. And then they unleashed a bunch of rats. You know, they have rat wranglers, and they come to these, you know, movie, in television and movies, right, where you see rats. They're, you know, they have these people that specialize in that, or cockroaches, or whatever you need. And this guy came with hundreds of rats, and so, you know, it was kind of an interesting thing to see, because I don't want to say they were trained, but they were obviously, you know, they kind of knew. They were in these cages. They had several people that worked with them. You know, they'd open the cage, let them run into the tunnel. You know, the rats would swim around in the water and all of this. And then, you know, we did this for hours and hours and hours. I had to do multiple takes of it. And, you know, and then at the end of the thing, they drained the tunnel, and the rats basically marched back out in their cages. It was quite extraordinary to see, you know. So it's like, you know, they're probably union rats, but it's you know, it's funny. I mean, they're not the rats you see in the New York subway, the Norway rats that have the long claws and they have the fangs that come out. I mean, you know, they're as big as a small dog, those rats. So it wasn't, you know, I would have really been freaked out if it was anything like that, because that's like, that's out of your nightmares, right?
Yeah.
But you know, I had to do multiple takes, and I had to swim in this water with these rats. And we did this, we did so many takes all day long, and after a while, the water starts to get dirty, and because it's in a tunnel. So I remember I probably maybe did 15 or 20 takes of it. And by the end of the day, I remember it was late at night, and the director said, we got to do it one more time. And I looked in the tunnel, and the water was so dirty from being there all day. And, you know, the cameramen were in the water and different things. And these rats are swimming around in the water. They're crawling up the sides of the tunnel, you know. And I thought, okay, you know, I went back in, and again, they were running on me. And, you know, so I would say that was probably ugly.
Yeah. It reminded me of a story I saw recently where someone fell into a hole in New York that was filled with rats. So it's like a pit hole open.
I saw that. It was in the Bronx. It was in the Bronx. He was standing on the street waiting for a bus. And yeah, I mean, we were talking about it in the city here, because, you know, if there's one thing about New York City, there's probably more rats here than people.
Yeah.
You rarely see them. I mean, you see them in the subway, but I mean, they also they have mitigating, you know, they spread poison and stuff. So you don't see them a lot, but because they hide, but you every once in a while you do see them. You do see them. They come out, they walk along the third rail or something. And, you know, it's you know, these are the rats that come out of the water, you know, come out of the river at night, you know, and they go through the trash.
Yeah.
You know, from all the restaurants that throw food away. So it's, you know, it's an interesting thing to see. But yeah, that story was incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The guy said,
and he wasn't injured. It was 12 feet of a fall, and he didn't get hurt because the rats cushioned his fall.
Yeah. And he also said that he didn't want to open his mouth to scream. Did you hear about that? He didn't want to open his mouth to scream because he thought the rats would run in his mouth. I thought, oh my gosh.
I'd never sleep again.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Absolutely amazing. Well, we just gone over the hour point there, so I think we'd like to say thank you so much for coming on, and we really appreciate it. Some great stories, some great advice. And do you have anything you want to promote? We could put your website. We'll put the website in the description down below if anybody wants to check.
You can go to my website. I mean, things have been a little bit slow now with COVID-19. I lost all my shows, but I've been, you know, rehearsing and writing. I have some things coming up in the future. Normally, I'm working all the time. I'm touring or I'm traveling, but you know, as you know, as everybody in the world knows, you know, the last 9 months, it's been a different thing. I mean, if I can say one thing to people listening, you know, who may want to do escapes and magic, you know, people always say, well, what's one piece of advice you want to give? And this is a piece of advice that Randy gave to me. Because I once asked him, I said, what's the one thing you can tell me, you know, that I need to know that I'll always remember, right? And this is what he told me, and now I'm telling it to you. He said that when you do escapes, always be in control, right? Always make conditions to fit yourself. So you know, and I would further that by saying you create the illusion of risking your life. You don't really want to risk your life. You don't want to do that. You want to do these escapes, whether it's a fire escape or whatever escape you're doing. You want to, you know, have 100% assurance up here, that nothing is going to go wrong. Now, it's good, you know, you want the audience to maybe only have 50% assurance, right? Because again, it's like the old fire truck thing, you know, people they don't want you to die, but if you are going to die, they want to be there to, you know, snap a photo of it and see it. So, you know, that's what I would just tell the people, because I use that mantra for myself, you know, always be in control. Don't let the audience know you're in control, but in, you know, in your heart, in your mind, I'm in control. I've covered every eventuality, and you know, this is safe. So.
Absolutely, that's some great advice. I think it's something, especially when it comes to escapes, because they can be quite dangerous, especially if you're new to it. Always, the real secret is the illusion of danger rather than danger.
Absolutely, and I'm just surprised how a lot of guys don't know that. You know, you had this performer in India, you know, die and stuff. There's no reason for that. There's no reason for that to happen at all, because you can use all the tricks of magic to make sure you come out alive. That's it. It's a show. It's a show. That's what it is. And if you approach it as a show, you know, then you'll be okay.
Absolutely. Great advice. I think that's the perfect way to end. So thank you very much. And we'll be back again next week. So we'll talk to you all then. Thank you so much.